I know you all want to hear from Dambisa, who has, to get back to the third country that's in this mix for this panel, the United States. You have one of the more dramatic views. There is a debate going on about whether the decline that we're suffering in the United States now is kind of a bad patch for a while, or are we on some historical decline that's going to go on and on? You have some rather dramatic figures that suggest the latter.
So I guess I'm glad I'm speaking after Tarun, because I think it's important, this discussion about whether it's America's going to rise, decline, what the issues are going on in the United States, I think should be set in a broader context. Fareed Zakaria has a very interesting article which came out, I think, last week about restoring the American dream. And in it, he initially starts talking about how he was raised in India watching Dallas and how he was completely obsessed with the big hair, the cars, and shiny America. And the thing that struck me the most is growing up in Africa, I had exactly the same experience. And we have in Africa 1 billion people, of which 60% are living, are under the age of 24, living in dire poverty, and all the issues that have been discussed here with respect to the need and desire to have economic growth, issues of poverty, the Gini coefficient, all of that apply to Africa tenfold. When it comes to the United States specifically, and just going back to Economics 101, economists look at 3 things as drivers of economic growth: capital, labor, and total factor productivity. And the point here is that if you look at the quality and quantity around capital, labor, and total factor productivity, it's very clearly a story that is leaning towards the emerging world. And I would say in many ways, because of the structural issues that we've been discussing around the United States the last couple of days, it's sort of leaning against the United States. I don't think that the United States is a sort of, it's all over, said and done. But I do think that there are still a lot of policy issues, not just around the United States specifically, but also in how they engage with bigger regions such as 1 billion people in Africa, and even closer to home, Brazil and Chile, which now are have China as their leading trading partners. I mean, so much for the Monroe Doctrine. We have to start to have a bigger engagement and bigger discussion around what America's role is going to be, particularly given that in places like Africa in particular, the United States policy and approach has been one which has been couched in aid. But now Africans and the African leadership has decided that that hasn't worked for 60 years. Africans are demanding more. They're very simple people. We want what you want. We want to have education. We want health care. And the reality is there are now other potential sources of finance, potential opportunities to build alliances with the Chinese, with the Indians. And so I hope that next time we're sitting up here, there will be discussions about the Obama presidency going to Africa with a new lens, not just to hand out money, which, by the way, the United States is just borrowing from China to hand to Africa. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed about the misallocation, the policies that have driven to misallocation of capital, labor, and total factor productivity in the United States. But the issues are much bigger than that.
They are, but there is a very big one for us that you tend to focus in on, and that is that we made such a mess of things that at least for a period of time, we need to close our economy some. We cannot continue as an open economy to the extent we are now and build jobs and take care of our own people. In other words, that hairy word, protectionism, it may be more current than we think if we are to do things right. You want to explain?
I mean, I think the way my next book basically argues that the United States is facing what I'd call a Hobson's choice. You have 2 alternatives. Either you stay open to the rest of the world in terms of trade and capital flows, or you close up and you try and figure out how to deal with what I believe are structural issues. I mean, I think the United States is going to be facing structural unemployment, which is something that no one in this room has really experienced unless you come from outside. Now, I know that in the United States, people get, because it's always either left or right or Democrat or Republican or black or white, people don't want to have a discussion around protectionism. However, given the fact that you do have a large number of jobs that are not coming back, which Glenn Hutchins talked about yesterday, and also the fact that if you look at what globalization has done in terms of the Gini coefficient, income inequalities in this country, and also the income growth, as was talked about a moment ago, in this country, and not just in the United States, but also in Europe, there should be space to have a clear discussion around what the possibilities around of having some form of protectionism, at least until you can fix some of the structural problems are in this country. I know people don't like that discussion because they point to Smoot-Hawley. They claim that because we're so integrated now, it wouldn't be possible to have some kind of more aggressive protectionist policies. But the reality is that it has to be on the table, and not just from the fringe as a discussion, but it has to come back into the mainstream as something that needs to be discussed. I just want to underscore the fact that everything has to be on the table. I don't think we can outright dismiss certain things because we have a sort of emotional attachment to the status quo. I do agree that having an open society where capital and trade moves freely is something that we all should aspire to and we should all want. But the fact of the matter is that the United States does have a history of preaching, basically saying, do as I say and not as I do. We know that there are farm subsidies. We know that the government in the United States has intervened in a number of sectors. So this is just another way of saying it's important for us to have this discussion about what the implications are. I do believe that there are gains clearly for the United States in terms of trade, but I do think that we should be open-minded to the fact that you could see an increase in your Gini coefficient in terms of income inequality, as people who are educated are the ones who are going to be the most competitive on the global scale. We should at least have the space to have that discussion. It's not crazy, and I do think that's the most important thing we should remember.